Thank you so much. Oh, good. The mic has checked. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Todd, as mentioned. We're here to talk about vulnerability haruspicy. It is a super fun word. It is SEO gold. Good luck finding anything else called that. And we'll just jump into it. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about haruspicy and what actually does it do. We're going to talk about CVSS, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. We're going to talk about EPSS, the Exploit Prediction Scoring System, and SSVC, the decision tree that I used to use a lot back when I was in federal government. Let's see if this thing will work. That'd be cool if it did. Oh, almost. Nope, wrong way. All right, here we go. So, haruspicy, what is it? If you are hanging around ancient Assyria or ancient Tuscany, what is now known as Tuscany, you probably ran into a haruspics. And what this person would do would they would accept from you a sacrificial animal. They would do the thing, and then they would pull out the liver and take a look at what the gods have to say about what's coming up. And it's on you to form a question of like, is tomorrow's military campaign going to be a success? Or are the crops going to be good this year? And then they're going to balance around a bunch of omens. They have a giant reference, thousands of omens, and they're going to pull out good omens and bad omens. And it's very similar to like palmistry or tarot or anything like that, right? Totally fun, and they will get you to an answer for sure, but is the shape and all the little fat lines on the liver actually a thing? I don't know. Maybe what they do seem to be doing is p-hacking, right? Which is a stat sin where you take a bunch of data and you say, oh, this must be statistically significant. So that's haruspicy. Does this sound familiar to anyone in your day-to-day job? I'm seeing nodding, so yes. So leaving that aside, what is CVSS? It is a scoring system that is crazy popular. It is really the only thing that ever gets reported on these days in tech news and security news. If you have a vulnerability that's a CVSS 9.8 or CVSS 10.0, and the point is very important because that makes it sound sciencey, then there's lots of pearl clutching and hues and cries of like, oh no, how could they let this happen? But really what we're going to talk about today, this afternoon, is the vectors that go into CVSS, how you get that number. We're going to talk about how it's not actually coupled very strongly with CVE. You can do CVSS scoring for any old vulnerability you like, is fine. Like, it's pretty transferable to any other vulnerability identification system. It is recently, I'd say, what is it, like 18 months or so about, version 4 got released. Right now, 3.1 is still the leader of all 2025 vulnerabilities that were CVE identified in 2025. Most, about 70 to 80%, have a CVSS. Of those that have a CVSS score, God, there's so many caveats on this. Of those that have a CVSS score, they tend to use version 3.1, which has been around for several years. About 20-ish% are on version 4. Version 4 is okay. It makes scope basically a little bit more, gives it a little more fidelity on scope. But ultimately, CVSS is fantastic for performing checkbox security, right? Like, I have a regulation, and my regulation says I have to patch every vulnerability in my environment that's CVSS 7.0 or worse, and worse is higher, right? So cool, now I can do my job, and I don't have to think about it at all. What I want everyone in this room to walk away from this talk with is like how we get to that CVSS 7.0 and what it actually means, and then why 7.0 is kind of magical, I guess, but I don't know, maybe it's just more soothsaying. So this is an example CVSS score, theoretical vulnerability, right? And we're just going to walk through like what this vector string really means. Anytime you're using CVSS, I strongly encourage you to actually pay attention to the vector. kind of throw out the number, but because the vector is like where the action is. So first off, there's a version number, right? And so CVSS 3.1 is the one you're going to likely run into. There's an access vector, right? That's my favorite. Either it's going to be accessible over the network, it's going to be accessible over an adjacent network. So think like ARP or DHCP, stuff that generally doesn't get propagated over the internet. There is a vector of local, which means like I have to have a shell like already on the device. Or there's physical, like I have to be touching the device in order to like do something bad with it. Usually that's things like hardware stuff. A lot of Intel stuff ends up with the physical. Attack complexity is often something that gets misunderstood when people are writing CVSS scores, but it will range from low to high. There's no none. Privileges required tend to be none, low, or high, so it's 3 points. And that just basically means like, can anyone touch this vulnerability? Does a authenticated user have to touch the vulnerability, or does like a super user or a power user or an admin or anyone who's like has more privileges than the average bear, right? Can they talk to the vulnerability? User interaction almost always tends to mean, does the user have to click on a thing for me to own them? Otherwise, can I just like fire it at will? Like, can I hit a server with this and the server's going to do something, versus do I have to like email an attachment to someone and then they click on the thing? The scope is probably one of the least understood vectors on CVSS. Scope basically means it's either going to be changed or unchanged. So those are the two vectors it can be. And scope says, if I own this machine, do I get an effect on that machine? And usually this is where you get like your 9.8. It's like everything is off the charts except for scope. Scope is unchanged, right? That's how you tend to get a 9.8 instead of a 10. And then we have our CIA triad, which we all know and love, confidentiality, availability, and integrity. One fun fact, availability is also often misunderstood. Well, I think it's misunderstood. It tends to be a little more subjective than we like, right? Because if I have a vulnerability and it gives me straight shot, root access, RCE, all the bad stuff, is availability impacted? Do I get to DOS the thing? I mean, I can type shutdown after I now have my cool root shell, right? Sometimes that will be scored as none, sometimes it'll be scored as high, very occasionally be scored as low. Nobody really has good, there isn't good consensus even out in the world of what does availability actually mean. So that's another way to get like a 9 point, I think it's a 9.7 if everything is off, but except for availability. So that's great. What I have noticed that when we've been looking, and what I've noticed is that it doesn't matter like what kind of time scale you're looking at CVEs that have CVSS scores. You will see the shape repeated over and over again. So it's a fractal curve, right? And so this is a randomly selected 76-day period in history. A couple thousand vulnerabilities were published over that time, and we see, a few 0 to 1s, a little bit of a trough of that like middle where we don't see anything, then a big spike like towards 7.2 to 7.8, and then it falls off rather sharply to criticals. Weird, right? Okay, well that's fine. Like it's not an even distribution. It's not just random scatter plot. It doesn't go up in a line, right? There's nothing like that. Or down, right? Like you'd expect to find like a lot of lame vulnerabilities and a few bad ones, because that's kind of how we live our lives. But that's not what is happening in the world. Anyway, 76-day period. Whoop, wrong one. So this is a year, July to July. Little bit different, like we can see some differences, right? We got more in the last year of the very, very low. Thanks, Linux kernel. And a little bit, what else have we got going on here? Oh yeah, and then we have the this 5-year period, which looks suspiciously similar to the 1-year period. Like there's not a ton of difference. We have a little bit higher in the 7s, a little bit, but like the shape is the same every time. Looks like a roller coaster, right? So what does this tell us? Well, I'll tell you. It is great. CVSS is super good at measuring itself. CVSS is designed to land on this 7-ish value every time for every vulnerability. Like, you have to work to get down into the 2s and 3s. You have to work hard to get up into the 9s and 10s. Almost every vulnerability, dollars of donuts are going to end up in this 7 business, right? So again, so there it is. There is a suspicious lack of these like low to mediums. I believe it's largely due to the overhead of like writing CVEs, calculating CVSS scores, telling people about it, writing advisories, all that jazz. No one's going to bother for a CVSS 2, right? So this notion that CVE is a way to describe all vulnerabilities in the world does seem to fall short if we're just looking at CVSS scores, right? It also implies that no matter what time scale you look at, we're doing the same thing over and over again. Like, we're reporting a lot of 7.8s and some 9s and 10s and a few 0 to 1s and nothing else. And so what does that mean? Does it mean that like the reporting systems are just kind of like doing the same thing over and over again? Are we writing exactly the same kind of bad software over and over again? Are we only reporting on bugs that are hitting those, you know, kind of those 3 points along the graph? I don't know. I don't know why that is. And like I said before, the vectors are the most interesting thing to me in CVSS. If your job is to reduce risk, take a look at the vectors. If you are in a position to ignore CVSS numbers, like you're not in a regulated industry that says thou shalt fix everything 7 and up, then, you know, pay a little more attention to those, right? Like a great example, this is a real bug. This is a bug in Red Hat, Grub. It's like a bootloader, and shenanigans can happen, and I can get you to like decrypt your Lux partition if I'm touching the thing and I've logged in. This is the kind of thing that I don't really need to spend a lot of time on, right? Because like, if someone is touching my machine and is logging in with a user account, I will probably notice. And I don't need a vulnerability management system to know, or an IPS to know that they're being attacked or anything like that, right? So that's the kind of thing. There's not very many that are like this, but it's at least something. I tend to sort on, you know, network accessible, no auth, blah, 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 and that'll get me into those like 8s and 9s anyway. But there are ways to like get high numbers that also kind of like suck for attackers. So pay attention to those vectors. CVSS is so popular that it spawned other VSSs. This is the pipeline vulnerability scoring system by Francois Poix, and he is a fine Canadian gentleman. I just ran into this a couple months ago. I think he's writing something up about it, but basically it's exactly the same as CVSS, except for the attack vectors are different based on repos and like repo visibility. If pipelines are your thing, then you might want to take a look at that, see what they're doing there. And time check, okay, at exactly 14 minutes in, I said AI. So yes, mark it off on your bingo card. So AI VSS is supposed to be, it's like endorsed by OWASP. It was kind of a weird announcement, I think, but you know, you go do you, OWASP. It is intended to express vulnerabilities in a very CVSS-like way for agentic AI. They change more things. Again, they change like the access vectors by like, where's the model and all that jazz. And they also add a fourth impact to societal impact. So if you want to measure like how racist is your AI, this is what you would use. Cool. So that's CVSS, right? Moving on. EPSS, I like EPSS. It's fun. I like the people who work with it. It's another FIRST project, and it's kind of new since 2021, which to me still sounds like the future, but that's because I'm old. But you can think of EPSS. EPSS builds a table of every CVE that is published, and it says, there is a X% chance that this CVE will be exploited in the next 30 days. Good luck. And how does it do it? Well, it does it with like machine learning magic. It's easiest to think of it as like a yin and yang, right? Like on one side of EPSS, we're looking at CVE entries themselves. We're looking at those CVSS vectors. We're looking to see if it's on the KEV. We're looking to see, is anyone talking about it? Certain keywords seem to like juice EPSS scores or not. it all is like, I think it's real. Like, I think there's real math and real science and real data science going on there. But it's also, because it's in that like AI house, it's a little bit inscrutable. Because on the other end, we also have a bunch of honeypot hits. We have a bunch of IDS hits. We have a bunch of like EDR hits that are getting pulled in. So now you're getting a little more like of those local attack vectors have more visibility now in EPSS, which is kind of nice. And that's why sometimes you see the scores fluctuate a little more than you used to. Feeds, they use commercial feeds from places like Gray Noise and Census and Shodan and Shadow Server, all these places, right? So they pull all that in to say, oh, look, something is happening with this vulnerability. It is, because it is machine learning and there's like no human like tweaking all the knobs, it is extremely agnostic about what the vulnerability is. It is extremely mechanistic. So hooray, rise of the machines. But it doesn't care like, is this low value, high value to attackers, medium value, whatever that means. It just does what it does, right? And at the end, they're not really threatiness, right? It is chance to be exploited. And so let's take a look a little bit about that, right? If you were to take, like I did, all of the EPSS scores and then, run a Monte Carlo simulation or just do, algebra, you'll find that about 10,000, at any given time, right now, about 10,000 or so unique CVEs are likely to be exploited in the next month, somewhere on Earth. To me, that seems crazy high. That is bananas high. The Sysakev, I was already on there. Sysakev has just a shade under 1,400 actively exploited vulnerabilities since the Sysakev has been running, so several years. Volchek's Kev has more, right? They're a little more fast, and they're a little more cowboy when they put things on there. That don't cut the mustard for Sysakev, but that's fine. It's great. They should do it. But they're in that like 3,500 range, nowhere near this 10,000 predicted value, right? And that takes everything from the things that have 90% chance of getting hit, and there's like a few hundred of those, right? So you would expect a lot of them to hit all at once. The reason why this is because EPSS tells you it is an exploit prediction scoring system, but if you look at the papers, they're like, well, we actually are checking out like what is exploitation activity, right? And so it's not limited to just shells. It's not limited to just breach events and ransomware events and things catching on fire and dogs and cats living together. It doesn't care about any of that. All it cares about is these 1 and 2 hits like on some IDS somewhere of something looks like that CVE looks like it's being tickled. It might be a scan. It might be just like inventorying on something else. It feels to the machine that this is probably that CVE, things like that, right? And so typically, very big noisy activity will tend to shoot EPSS scores way up when they're normally kind of depressed. They normally tend to be in the 0 to 10. There's a lot of 0 to 10% chances. But what are those things that push it up? Here's one example. This is CVE 2025-2010. This is a bug in a WordPress plugin. It's like some job seeker board thing. It's a normal run-of-the-mill SQL injection thing. Started life down in that 0% range, 0%, ticked up just a little bit, and then suddenly, on July 13th, 38% chance of this thing getting exploited. Why? Well, this was the fun mystery. This is the mystery you can play every day now, because I looked and I said, well, what happened right before July 13th when the scores came out at 9 a.m. Central Texas time? Well, somebody had written and published a nuclei template to exploit this thing. And so writing the template writing and publishing the template seems to be the thing that pushed this up a solid almost 40 points from baseline of nothing. It may be, you're right, the nuclei template, and then all the script kiddies are running around the whole internet and like running this thing. I don't know, I can't tell. But it seems to be consistent. Those kinds of things seem to be consistent. Metasploit modules are another great example, right? Of things that suddenly are very interesting when they weren't very interesting yesterday. It doesn't mean that EPSS is like a great nuclei template detector, because there are other things that are mysterious to me, like stuff like this, right? Volatile EPSS scores do exist today. I believe this one just popped down and up again this week while we're here. But it's old as heck, right? It's a CVE 2002 vulnerability. It's a username leak on an IP key exchange, which is the internet key exchange username leak. Because it's from 2002, like every IDS, every firewall like has a signature for this thing, and it trips all of the time, except for when it doesn't. Why is that? I don't know. Again, another mystery. I suspect it's because like a particular node goes offline once every couple weeks, and then the scores get depressed, right? But now you can play at home. We just released just now, we being Run Zero, where I work, we released EPSS Pulse. You can go to it, and you can see every day. You can go look every day. It's ungated, and you can see how these scores do. And we have a little spark line that looks cool as hell. And you can see like, oh, do things go up? Do things go down? Do things oscillate around a lot? And this can be a fun starting point for your daily, I don't know, detective work, right? Some people do crosswords. Maybe this is your thing now. I don't know. And so you can play along at home. It's ungated. There's no login. There's nothing like that. It's a daily dashboard for this kind of thing. I don't know if this is valuable. We put some work into it. We flung it out there. I wrote a paper and everything, found this thing. This might just be Haruspicy all over again. I don't know. That's what I'm hoping that people will tell me. It's like, oh no, it's just noise. It's just like normal ML jitter. You know, you set your thresholds to be something huge, right? Like 50% jumps. And you'll see like 1 or 2 every 2 or 3 days will like pass that threshold. Why do they go down over time? Also don't know. Even more mysterious, like did someone delete a Metasploit module? That seems to happen way more often than Metasploit modules get deleted. I don't know. But yeah, you can go there, EPSS Pulse. There'll be a QR code at the end, blah, blah, blah. It's not paid, I promise you, I'm not selling a thing. But I am interested if you start following this, tell me what you find. Built on EPSS is the LEV, which is likely exploited vulnerabilities. And that wants to know, well, how come the Kev lists are so short? Are we missing something? And the answer seems to be yes. The authors of the paper, Jono and Peter, are very smart, very mathy. I like them a lot, and they're very friendly too. So reach out if you want to help out with this question. The biggest stumbling block they ran into is like, well, we can't measure the whole of the internet all of the time, so we don't really know what our margin of error is. Like, cool, okay, awesome. But the math seems solid to me, right? So check out the paper, it's dope. Finally, I'm going to close out this whole tour of vulnerability scoring systems with SSVC. I never used SSVC until I worked at CISA, which I did for a little while there. This is what CISA uses to determine now that we know about a vulnerability, what should we do with it? And what SSVC requires, pretty much, which is why it's hard to do, is you have to have a pretty good handle on like what's actually in your network on your site, right? So if you know that you've got no Windows at all, like running in your thing, right? Your Macs and your Google Cloud and everyone's distributed, and you don't actually have any like on-prem exchange or anything like that, right? You don't have to care about the SharePoint disaster, theoretically, right? Like you should care, like as a person, but like you don't have to care for like your assets, right? And so you would go through SSVC in that case and say like, oh, well, I don't have any targets, so I don't care. And that's basically what it does. It is not really a scoring system. It's more of a decision tree framework. And they tell you this like on the tin. If you read the paper was published by CISA and I want to say Software Engineering Institute, like co-sealed it. Oh yeah, it is. And you end up with a bunch of decisions you have to make, and you end up with like either I'm going to track the thing, which really means put it in a drawer and don't worry about it. Monitor, which means put it in a drawer but check on it every once in a while. Attend, which means like, ooh, I have to wake up my boss. And act is, oh, I have to wake up my boss and literally everyone else, right? Act is the worst. That tends to map to like criticality, right? It is intended to be a starting point that you can do things with. The idea is like get some discipline around, the decisions that you're making, and you can justify it, right? Like you can do it like it's kind of the thing that CVSS wants to do, right? Have a kind of a normalized, objective way to point to something you can point to and say, hey, boss, this is why we're doing the things we're doing. Not that like, oh, I feel like it's a vulnerability. I feel like it's a big deal. Like you say like, oh, it is because I answered these 5 questions, right? It is, like I said, it's mappable to severity. It's not really intended to be severity, but that's just, that's just caveats, right? Like it is essentially severity. This is the entire decision tree that's as published by SEI and CISA. It's it's a eye chart, but you'll see like it's greenish, like low sev at the top, reddish at the bottom. Just as a real quick tour, what SSVC asks is there, do I know that this thing is getting exploited right now? Or do I know that there is a proof of concept that's like decent, or do I not know, right? Then I'll ask like, does the exploit need any help? Very similar to CVSS's user interaction vector. It'll ask, well, what is the technical impact? Is it lame or is it good, right? Like, do I get to learn some secrets or I get to like own the thing? And then how important are the targets? If the target for the bug is like your desktop printer, well, you're used to that thing going offline all the time because it's a printer and it sucks, because all printers suck. And but if it's something like important, right, like I don't know, like your core, database, right, like regardless of all of my mitigating controls, like if my database goes down, the thing that I'm like writing all my customer stuff to, that's a big deal. Or if it gets popped, right, that's a big deal. And then finally, are people going to die if this thing blows up? So that tends to be things like, is it a hunk of IoT gear? Is it a emergency 911 system, right? Those are the kinds of things, right? That goes down, people die. Bad. That will tend to bump those things up. So ultimately, though, it does feel very tarot-y. When you get practice at it, you get to be really fast at it, which is a bonus. One of the nice things about SSVC is that you don't have to do a lot of this work anymore because in CVE land, if you're dealing with just CVE identified vulnerabilities, because CISA is doing it for you. The CISA ADP is already providing exploitation evidence, technical impact. They don't know, right, in the CVE record, like what your environment looks like, so that's still, on you. But if you just look at things like, is there a known proof of concept and the technical impact is high? Like you can sort the CVEs this way today and you'll get about, well, I wrote these slides about a week ago, so you'll get about 430 or so, I think right now, of CVEs that like hit that mark, which is still, a lot and everything, but it's not thousands. And so it's a nice starting point, right? It's like, oh, well, CIS has already done all this work for me. And like I said, you do have to know your own environment. So all that said, we very much want to have a machine to tell us how bad this thing is. But the real vulnerability scoring system is the friends we made along the way. And that is real, right? The LLMs are great, the MLs are great, and all the other AI things, fine, whatever. But you need humans and you need friends. And those friends are like people in your trust group, people that tend to have a track record of saying like, that one looks bad, before, like the worldwide event that happens. You'll talk to people who have been around the block on this thing, or people that just somehow uncannily know, like, oh, this is bad. And every time this dude says it's bad, I should probably act, right? Because at the end of the day, no scoring system can predict human intent, right? So we can't yet, Tom Cruise our way into predicting future crime and like arresting the bad guys before they do the thing. And also that would like screw up all our models if we did it. Time is linear and for a reason. But yeah, like turn to your trust groups. I like Kev lists a lot. There's a couple out there. I like this is the one the best, heart. But like Vulnchecks is good as well, right? And other people are starting to pull ones up. There's one coming up in Europe now that is pretty decent. It's very, very small now. And so, take a look at those. It also tends to mean like The horse has left the barn already, so hopefully you weren't in that first wave. But anyway, that's all I got. I hope you do some homework. I wrote a paper about all this, which you can read without my irritating voice. And like I said, I have EPSS Pulse running now on Run Zero. Go check it out, and check it out like on the daily. Do your Wordle, do your Pulse check, and that's a good way to start the day. So thank you very much.